Hello. All right. Make a little video here and to Hythloday, and I'm going to share this screen. Sort of, I'll do this. I don't really have this planned out. I'll try to leave a link. I watched a video. I guess I'm behind on your videos, Hythloday, but I watched Skepticism in Physics. And so I have a few things. So, you said about how you thought maybe they would come around to Gary's system in some sense, which is funny considering what you've said to him otherwise, but I get it. Right? I think I get it. It's like you feel some sympathy with his conclusion and his doggedness to go forward, even though he's ass backwards to a clown. It's noble, like Don Quixote or something. But here's the thing. I just want to find out what it is that you think. Now, Gary, as far as I'm concerned, can't really figure out how to engage with that. But I happen to know that you have paid close attention to what these experiments and things say. Not that I think you have every detail right. I'm not saying I do either. But I do know, compared to Gary, that you understand some of the issues. So, first of all, what we're going from is the quantitative measurements. Now, granted, from the theory, we built these experiments to test the theory, and some weird results came out. But the experiment itself is an apparatus, and it's not just a 2-slit. It is 1 slit. It's 5 slits. It's various obstacles. They've done, as you know, all sorts of things. Right. And I think your issue about what it says about some sort of determinism is interesting. All right. But one thing that's clear from the experiments is that it's weird. Whatever it is, it's weird, right? Gary's system's weird. Any explanation is weird. Now, I think you know why they say that the oh, that's a really shitty line there, because my tablet, it's hard to draw on the tablet. So let's see why'd that go. Oh, maybe it should be like this. Let's try this. A little bit better. Now, I know when they send the photons in here, you know why, even though one photon is going through and you have the screen back here collecting things, you know why they say it looks like some phenomena goes through both. Now, the only paradox is if that phenomena is a photon, and it seems like a photon because it makes a little tiny speck one at a time, right? So it seems like no, but another way of looking at it is, okay, you have a wavefront, right? It comes here, both slits make, a diffraction pattern. And if it was a water wave, so far so good, no surprises. You'd expect that from a wavefront, right? For some reason, this phenomena altogether makes just one speck at a time. Okay, that's the weird thing. But I see it like static electricity. Yeah, there is some sort of a connection in this wavefront, and then when the bubble pops and it makes a little photon mark, it only has enough energy to make one somehow. So as far as I'm concerned, that is a mechanism. Right? Because I'm not saying there's no mechanism, like you said. I agree, that would be crazy. I'm just saying the mechanism isn't necessarily something that fits with our just our common sense. It's allowed to seem weird. Because look, the Earth being around is weird. The fact that the Earth is round, it looks pretty fucking flat when the way we live it. I'm going crazy here. Okay. This is Inkscape, in case anybody's curious. So it's allowed to be a little bit strange. And it is a little bit strange, and we haven't explained it, but it does count as a mechanism. Now, I think will is going to turn out to be sort of a fundamental. I believe, like you think certain things are supposed to be sensible and concrete, in this abstract sense of concrete. And I kind of have that feeling about will. I think that whatever the force is behind will, it's got to have something to do with choice and freedom of motion. Now, freedom of motion doesn't mean you're unconstrained. Doesn't necessarily even mean that you are a doesn't mean you're not determined. It doesn't mean that you in any sense aren't subject to the laws of nature. It's more like, well, you kind of are one of the laws of nature. Doesn't mean anything is without a mechanism. But you can have freedom of motion. It's like if if times like this, right, and you're just the thing that's moving along it, and you get to here and you move along here, now you're there. But at this point, you could have gone down here to this other choice. All of these paths are totally determined. What allows you to have so-called freedom is that while it has more dimensionality than you have less dimensionality, right? So, a three-dimensional being can't even fit in a two-dimensional space, right? But a two-dimensional being has a lot of space to move around in a three-dimensional space. Lots of orientations, right? Even though the three-dimensional space is entirely determined, every point is sort of already, exists in some sense. It can't create or destroy that 3D space, but it has a lot of room to move and be moved around, right? And I think that those of us that believe in free wheels are allowed to also have a kind of compatibilism that willpower can be determined in that sense by some mechanism. And if there's a branching, then we have possibly the ability to branch because we're in these so-called lesser dimensions. Now, here's the thing about dimension I wanted to say, though, also. It's not that there are extra dimensions. That's a what's the word I'm looking for? It's like you're making an assumption that a presumption that what you see is what exists. Just if there's always been whatever dimensions there were, first of all, and I have a second point that's just as important and quite separate, but those dimensions were always there. If like we are a blind animal and we don't have eyes, we're a blind mole and we can't see light, it doesn't mean light isn't already there. The light might seem like an extra dimension if you hear about it from somebody, but it's not an extra dimension. It's right here. We as creatures with certain senses and everything, haven't necessarily noticed these quote unquote dimensions. But moreover, I kind of agree with you. I think that pretty much dimension's the wrong word. Mathematically, any free variable is a dimension and acts like a dimension. So I think a lot what you get with these multiple dimensions is like really each field is a dimension. So in the electromagnetic field or in the electric field at a particular point in space, you can have a little a value there basically that's a two-dimensional value of its own right, or three-dimensional pointing somewhere, right? And you also have a magnetic one, but it turns out that the two are related in a different direction. And those are dimensions. Why? Because they're free variables that can apply to point in space. And so, it's misleading to call these dimensions. It's just sort of like free variables at every point in space. And that's all a field really is. And so I still don't understand your complaints about fields in the sense that we have space. The fact that things are spread out, that's the field part. If it was empty, like the old idea of a perfect vacuum, fine, it's still spread out. It's still like 1 mile apart. It's different from 2 miles apart. So there's something there in a conceptual existence, even if it's just space, empty of non-space, but full of space. So I don't really understand that particular objection. I was also going to say that a lot of the physicists like to talk about, what if we have events, right? And uh, and then they lead to other events, right? And I believe if you roll dice, that it leads to at least 7, actually 36 different events, say. And actually more than that, but you can collapse it down by like adding up the dice. It would be 7, right? And the reason you can shift from one to the other is because time as a force going pow in this direction and boom, 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 all these things happen on it. That's an illusion. What's really happening is we go from event to event to event. And the phenomena of time is just this whole chain straightened out onto a line. Keeps up pretty good. All right. I've had this tablet for a while. I wasn't really using it. Plus, I have a little bit newer version. I don't know if there's a way to, I think there is, I do know of a way to delete everything, actually. I just remember there's a control way. There we go, that did okay. So anyway, you like to use these things, so I thought I'd use it, but I didn't necessarily use it. Well, it probably slows me down, and that's probably better. So let's see, is there anything else I wanted to say? Yeah. So I do believe there's a mechanism. I believe that when we talk about higher dimensionality, for example, in the 2-slit, it's because when you look at it as a single particle, it's got this extra degree of freedom of being able to go through both slits or something. I agree, that doesn't really make sense. What does make sense is a wave hits both slits, and what we see is a little speck on the screen, but a wave is obviously sloshed through both slits. A wave, that's not weird that a wave would slosh through both slits. It might be weird that the electromagnetic field took the place of the ether, and instead of being a regular medium, it's a weird, to us, relativistic medium. But on the other hand, it's still a medium, and we actually know a lot about why the magnetic force tugs and back and forth and has this oscillation with the electric force, and when a photon zips along, we actually, it makes a lot of sense. Actually, it's a weird little medium in that it's not fixed in space, and it's relativistic. It's fixed to every point and observer. That's kind of a weird part, but it's still a medium, and things ripple out, and it's a wavefront. Now, why do we see just a particle? I can deduce that it's because we're taking a cross section, right? We're taking a cross. There's a line, and we see a dot because we took a cross section. There's a wave front, and we see a slice. Now, think about this. So a photon is like a little slice of a wave, right? Now, it's normal to have a wave pulse. You just shove some water, and you get a wave pulse. But we also, with the photon, you're seeing like one slice of a wave, as if a wave could come up in just a little slice. Can you imagine a big long wave, a big crashing wave on the beach, but it's just somehow a tiny little slice, and they can actually come at different times? That's hard to imagine. And in fact, it's somewhat impossible to imagine, which seems why the full wave is splashing up on the shore. We have some sort of glasses on our eyes. Our eyes are only able, for whatever reason, to see this one cross section, right? But knowing that there is a lot more than we can see gives us the freedom of space, right? To be a smaller dimensional creature in a larger dimensional space, it means you have degrees of freedom left over, right? And we don't believe in free will. No. But we believe in will power. Just like all other kinds of power, we can find out how it works. I personally won't find it any more surprising if everything was somehow just decided by initial conditions that, what, were they random or unrandom? What were the initial conditions that created this continuity of determinism? What were the initial conditions, right? What were they? Because that's important, right? If the initial conditions were set by a human being, for example, then it would be this being's willpower. It's no less amazing if it's been determined every point, or if there's a whole lattice work that's determined by the laws of physics, perhaps infinite in size, but still limited. Not anything goes. You know, you can have an infinite number of beagles and still not have any chihuahuas. So infinite doesn't mean everything. It just means an unlimited of whatever. If you have some branching network and you can just hum along like this as a smaller dimensional thing, that might be what passes for free will. And then you'd be right, because that is an illusion. You want to also say that, no, you can't turn left or right. You have to turn the one way. And that's where we disagree.